1st of November is when the Finance Minister, Inogodongwana, will deliver the medium-term budget policy statement. It's expected to be a very difficult statement because it's expected to be announced that we are running out of money. We've run out of money because there's already a Treasury memo to various departments warning of budget cuts. Cut back on catering, cut back on workshops, cut back on travel. And this is along with the cutbacks that we've seen over just the last few years in critical public services, health, education, policing. And while the A word, austerity, has not been used by our president or by our finance minister, you can bet your dollar that we are there. Songezo Zibi is the founder of Rise Mzansi, writing in the on Times Lives that South Africa pays more than 27 billion rand per month for servicing its growing debt. It's more than 1 billion rand per working day. Of course, budget cuts means the poorest suffer, Songezo, and you also write that it's because of years of economic mismanagement, corruption and bad appointments at critical state-owned companies that are coming back to haunt us. Your days as a financial journalist and working in banking institutions, how much of the dwang, how deep are we ahead of that November 1st medium-term budget speech?
Good morning, Lester, and thanks for having me on. The hole is deep, even deeper than it appears. And the reason for that is that the South African government guarantees the debt of state-owned companies. In other words, where they to get into a position where they cannot pay, the South African government, the Treasury, would dip into the current budget coffers and pay the banks and other lenders that money. That's how it works, which means the national debt that we have at around 750 to so 75% of GDP is even larger because Eskom alone owes more than 400 billion rand. Transnet is no longer able to meet all of its debt covenants, and were they to default, then the government would have to make good. It also triggers something scarier that the listeners should know, which is called a cross default, which means if Eskom, for instance, or Transnet, or any of those institutions are unable to meet their monthly debt obligations by way of interest payments, then all the lenders would recall all of their debt that the South African government has. And then you have an Argentina or Ukraine situation from a few years ago, or Greece. This is the situation. There is no other way of putting it. And I feel that our political leaders are not paying enough attention. They're pretending it's not there.
I know that the A word, austerity, is not good for politicians. You don't want to tell an electorate, particularly 8, 9, 10 months ahead of an election, that we are implementing austerity measures. But it does not necessarily seem that the president or the Treasury externally, internally, they're very serious, issuing those memos to various government departments. We are slashing budgets, but we're not telling the electorate, we're not telling South Africans and people who live in South Africa, it's going to be a tough time over the next months, years, decades, because we've already seen the national health budget cut in real terms by 5% in the last financial year. Education also cut in real terms by 2% over the next financial year. These are issues that are affecting the poorest of the poor, people who rely on social services. Why isn't this government saying we are in a period of austerity?
That's what they're going to be forced to do at the beginning of November. By the way, the fact that the medium-term budget policy statement is taking place in November is in itself indicative of the problem. If listeners go back historically, the budget in February takes place on the first or second Thursday. On the second Thursday of February. And similarly in October, it is a Wednesday. It has been moved by almost a month because they need to work on this. I think they will have to deliver a tough message. As a country, we don't have to take from the poor, which is my worry about VAT, because the poor then have to pay VAT. There are many areas in which the South African government wastes money, and we need to now decide whether we're going to have any more bailouts to optional SOCs like SAA and so on, or we're going to focus firstly on people, safeguard their well-being, and secondly, do the kind of economic reforms that unleash private sector capital into the economy.
4 things we can do. We can grow the economy, we can spend less money, we can privatize state-owned enterprises, or we can increase tax. What would be the easiest thing for the South African government to do of those 4 options?
Look, I think firstly, we can't take from the poor, firstly. Second, we don't have to privatize state-owned institutions in the manner that people envisage. For instance, and this is just an example, the government can decide that it is going to build, operate, and secure the rail system. But the locomotives and anything to do with the transportation of goods is done by concession to private companies. That saves the government the financial trouble of having to buy locomotives, maintain them, buy parts, and so on. You put that in private hands. You have very strict conditions on pricing so that you don't have price gouging. What that does, it releases the bottleneck on the economy that Transnet is, on the one hand, and at the same time, it saves the government money. That saving can go to other critical areas where you need to actually spend money.
But we never let a good crisis go to waste. Cyril Ramaphosa has for the longest time now threatened at the restructuring of the state and government, streamlining it. You would see a lot of the rent-seeking class pushing back on this, but using this as an opportunity to say, I'm going to slash a cabinet from 20-odd to 10 or 12. I'm going to streamline government departments. I'm going to streamline the entire state to cut our cloth to match our budget. Is this not a golden opportunity for Cyril Ramaphosa to do that?
I think South Africa doesn't need much more than 15 ministries, if that at all. But this president will not do it because it does affect, say, the dynamics within the ANC. But there are other areas that are. Let me give you an example that are really important. The government spends 1.7 billion on the VIP protection for our politicians, for instance. That is 2 to 3 times more than we spend on maintenance in the South African Defence Force, in the Air Force, in the Navy, as well as other critical areas. The South African Army has literally collapsed due to underfunding over the years. But the priorities, as you can see, have shifted to VIP protection units, which are getting ever bigger. The cars are getting bigger and more expensive, and they're getting ever more violent. So these are the kind of political choices that have to be made to direct resources where they are needed.